Hello and welcome to the latest episode of No Accounting for Taste with me, Matthew Ward, and the familiar voices of Accounting Web's managing editor Richard Hattersley.
Hello.
And technology editor Tom Herbert.
Hey Matt, hi everyone.
Before we get into proceedings, we have a couple of holidays to discuss. Tom, you spent some time in Iceland recently. How was it?
Oh, it was glorious, yes. I mean, compared to the scorching temperatures over here, it was a sort of cool 11 or 12 degrees and drizzling most of the time. It was marvellous. I loved it. But no, I mean, what was really good was that I got to relive my geography A-level from 30 years ago. I didn't do terribly well in it, to be perfectly honest, but, the terms like mantle plume or pyroclastic flow, not so important when you're sat in a dusty classroom in Bristol, but when you're literally sat on an active volcano in the Atlantic Ocean, then it takes on slightly more importance. I really got the impression that the geographer is king in Iceland, but perhaps the geologer, if that's a thing. So it was great. Yeah, I did lots of walking. So did a bit of snorkeling in a fissure full of glacier water, which was cold. And it was a general good time was had. Yeah.
And I believe, am I right in saying on previous holidays you've visited tech vendors? Was there any of that this time around?
That was in Estonia. Yeah, I called it on a practice management company, Uku. Well, no, sadly I didn't contact any Reykjavik-based software vendors this time around. There just wasn't time. Disappointing. Yeah,
what a shame. And I said we had a couple of holidays to discuss. Richard, you recently spent an evening in the cab of an articulated lorry. Do you want to tell us about that? Or?
Unlike Tom, it didn't bring back any memories from my school or anything. No geography lessons given. But when there's opportunities like this, when an articulated lorry parks up not too far away from where you live, you got to take the chance. There's not many opportunities in this area, in this game of accountancy, where you get to climb into someone's cab and have a look around.
Yeah.
But here we go.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, while we let the imagery of that sink in with listeners, Tom, you had some Xerocon thoughts that you wanted to share with us.
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, I was very sad. This is the first Xerocon I've missed since 2015 because I was away. I mean, I did point out to my handlers at Xero that the trip was booked before I knew the dates for Xerocon, and I was actually very sad to miss it. But it sounded like it had all the razzmatazz associated with past Xerocons, as it were. Any highlights, Richard, from the show floor?
Yeah, definitely the razzmatazz was there, and it wouldn't be Xerocon without the razzmatazz. So if you immediately as you walk into Olympia, which was the venue for Xerocon, you looked around and there was a massive slide from the top deck of Olympia down to the bottom into a ball pit, which really kind of typifies the kind of the vibes of Xerocon, isn't it? But into the main stage, the big topic of conversation was AI. The kind of AI was swirling over Olympia on that day, along with the super hot weather. And it was kind of unavoidable because obviously Xero's recently done their integrations with Anthropic and now Microsoft. So we got that in the background. There was a slide which was projected across the Jumbotron. And kind of that can't be emphasized enough. The stage of the keynote for Xero was huge. It was from one side of Olympia all the way to the other side. But there was a graph which was projected onto Jumbotron during the opening keynote where the CEO, Sukhinder, Singh, Cassidy kind of opened proceedings. And this showed the number of users accessing APIs, the Xero APIs since January. And it kind of showed that there'd been a fourfold increase in activity, which would kind of set up the theme of the rise of the builders, the kind of the users who are using AI to build their own software, their own workflows, and kind of layer that on top of the platform. So yeah, AI was very much the big theme throughout the event. Although I'm sure you might get into this, Tom, but AI comes with other challenges as well for a product like Xero.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'd be fascinated to know how many. I mean, they put the stat there about the API calls. I'd be fascinated to know how many firms are actually doing this. You know, the number of firms. It's one of those. It's a hard one to calculate, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, I certainly know a couple. Obviously, in my Rolodex of cutting edge accountants that are using these types of models to sort of pull data down from Companies House or pull it across from ledger systems, but it's not many at the moment. You know, this feels like quite advanced stuff for your average practice.
And the Anthropic integration, whilst it's still at early days, the number of users, I assume worldwide, is still only 20,000.
You know, not to be sniffed at, but
No,
you know,
no.
out of a subscriber base of 4.9 million, it's yeah, it's an interesting time. And no, I enjoyed your write up and your interview. You got to sit down with Sukhinder herself. How was she?
Yes, Sukhinder was. Yeah, when you get into to meet a CEO of a company of this size, you understand why they're in the position that they're in. I did ask her about kind of the key themes of like the SaaS apocalypse, kind of big effect which is happening across tech firms, which is causing many of them to feel incredibly nervous at the moment. I mean, she responded and said that Xero is more than just 5 lines of code. And she emphasized that it's an interconnected system, and that's why it's hard to replicate. Obviously, she herself tried to replicate Xero using an AI tool, but didn't get as far as the ledger. What would it be in far too complicated to actually do in AI? So that was their defense against kind of AI kind of completely removing the need of a product like Xero. But
It's a real tightrope they're walking, isn't it? Yeah, I think reading your article, listening to the pod, and which is available on this feed, by the way, everyone. Just search one back, and seeing what other people were saying on the socials. I mean, it is such an interesting time at the moment for ledger players, like established ledger players like Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, etc. You know, they're in a funny place. I mean, Xero's had so much success for so long, and I think it's still a great tool. You go out, you chat to people not only at Xerocon but just more generally. I think a lot of people will still say it's the best, it's the most robust ledger tool on the market. I mean, tech heads like to talk about the legacy code base. That's fine. I'm not sure anyone other than nerds like me care about that. I mean, it's profitable. You know, it took a while, but it is profitable. User numbers are rising. Like I mentioned, 4.9 million worldwide, 1.3 million in the UK. I mean, they should be happy. But, you know, I think there are rumblings of discontent. They're sort of demonstrably not. I guess we'll get on to reasons. Yeah, we'll get on to reasons why in a minute. I mean, a couple of announcements from your article caught my eye. The smart document capture. So the thing that can pull in documents, receipts, invoices, etc., and extract the data and sluice it into Xero. I mean, that's been on the slate for a while, but it definitely improves on what they've got with HubDoc. And I guess moves the Xero tanks onto the data and expense management app lawn as it were. It was quite interesting. Must have been an interesting Xerocon without the Dext orange shirts. I mean, I certainly can't remember them, but their CEO put out an interesting post on LinkedIn about why they wouldn't be there, like citing particularly Xero's decision to charge or change the way they charge third-party vendors for connecting to Xero's system. That was quite a big story a few months back. And the other thing I was really interested to see was the expansion into the mid-market. So obviously Xero has always been this sort of cloud small business accounting tool, but Xero Ultra, quite a funky name, is a sort of decent idea to bridge that gap between the SMB cloud accounting tools and your full-blown ERP tools, your Sage Intacct, your NetSuite, etc. I think this gap does exist. You've got companies like Mayday, Gather Nexus, Finstack, Join. They're all sort of filling that gap. Where people might want to stay on Xero, but for whatever reason they aren't. Don't feel that they can. You've also got the likes of iPlicit, Accounts IQ, Xledger, etc. From the specs I've seen for Xero Ultra, I mean, it seems to cover multi-entity reporting well, but I think based a lot on the functionality of SIFT Analytics, which they bought a couple of years back. And so, that's one of the reasons you might move off Xero in the past, having multiple entities and having to consolidate that data. But there are other reasons as well. Your classic one is transaction volumes, or sort of multi-currency maybe. So I think that I'd need to know more about Xero Ultra and its specifications before I sort of hail it as a genius sort of god tier move. So yeah.
You gave us a bit of a teaser earlier on, Tom, that not everybody is happy with what's happened here. Can you expand on why that might be?
Yeah, I mean, Richard hinted at this a little earlier.
Oh.
The SaaS apocalypse, as it's been dubbed. So there's a dramatic fall in share prices for, not just accounting tech vendors, but pretty much across the software as a service, the cloud market, as it were. I think investors have been spooked by the potential for some of these larger large language models or the sort of hyperscalers to just use this new generation of technology to build cheap alternatives to them, and so it would make their investments completely worthless. I think a lot of problems, it's not just for Xero, but it is the way they're set up, right? Shareholders always want more. It's quite interesting. I was at the Zoho event yesterday, sort of hosting a panel, but one of the sessions Zoho gave was a sort of brief introduction to their company, and they made a big deal about being bootstrapped and having no outside investors to be answerable to, which means, no price hikes, no change in direction, that kind of thing. So it's interesting that people are starting to use that as a sort of USP, as it were. But yeah, I think the market's absolutely balmy, personally. Got a successful, profitable company like Xero that's being spurned for tech that in all likelihood is never going to be profitable. Apologies for listeners. I probably have banged this drum before numerous times on the pod, but the unit economics of these large language models is completely ridiculous. And quite soon we are going to have a reckoning where the prices are significantly hiked. I think sentiment has gone one way, and the market, the investors have all gone like sheep towards that. The Xero share price has tanked like 60% in the last 12 months. I don't think the CEO has helped that. I think yesterday, I think she sold all the remaining ordinary shares that she had, apparently to settle a personal tax liability. But still, it's not a good look, as it were, when the CEO is doing that. Interesting, she did it straight after Xerocon, presumably. Timing wasn't linked, but yeah, the and the Xero users, they're not exactly thrilled. I mean, it is accounting software, but still, like after we've had years of them drinking the Kool-Aid, that Kool-Aid feels a bit lukewarm now. I think a lot of the issues I think if people around pricing. It works for those companies in that a solid S on the SME, or perhaps moving upwards, but does it work for those smaller entities anymore? I don't know about you, Richard, but I've definitely seen those Xero only firms add something like Free Agent or heaven forbid Sage when they're preparing for Making Tax Digital.
It's certainly conversations I've had, similar ones where people have said, these Xero faithful, part of the Xero faithful, Xero only firms say they're exploring other options. They're no longer as tied to that one software as perhaps they were, say 5-6 years ago.
Yeah. I think there's also frustration about platform outages that we had a little while ago. The new invoicing tool's not universally popular, shall we say. And I think the decision to shut down the Xero Central discussion forum, I mean, I know it's a small thing, and that's the sort of hardcore power users sort of going on and suggesting stuff. But when users put a lot of time and effort into providing feedback, and to see that just sort of deleted, I think, is a bit of a kick in the teeth. I mean, it happened to us with Accounting Web, back in whenever it was, 2017, something like that, when we upgraded, and we got a lot of hostility off the back of that. So it happens. But I think I think the overriding message, like the performance is still good, and they're adding sensible things like the corporation tax. Seems really sensible to me, as well. I think just adding those core features. What I felt from 2 years ago, the Xerocon, when I interviewed Sukhinder then, it felt like they'd streamlined a lot. They'd focused on those 3 core areas, and that really felt like a good direction that they were going in. And now I feel like that balance needs to be restored, like less of the AI froth about builders and more on like properly fixing the things that the users are unhappy with. I think I hope I'm getting this quote right, but I think I heard Alistair Barlow talking about accountants' moat. Their what's really important about their role and what isn't going to be taken away by technology is their accountability. The software isn't accountable, the AI isn't accountable. There's a reason why clients go there, and I think that's really important for software vendors to remember. To be helping accountants be accountable.
You talked there, Tom, about there needing to be a little bit more balance. Are you optimistic that will happen, or is it just one of those unknowns at the moment?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, they've got a good team over there. I think that they are like a lot of these announcements about AI are kind of for the market to say, hey, yeah, we're doing the AIs too. While in the background they are still sort of beavering away on the stuff. But yeah, it'd be nice. I think it would be really nice to just hear a little bit more about the product stuff and less about the froth.
Excellent. Well, thanks as ever for the insight with that one, Tom. Richard, it's been another busy quarter for the profession, hasn't it? What's been going on?
It has, yes. I thought as we're coming up, we're just past the half year mark, but I thought it was a nice opportunity to reflect back over the past 3 months and just see what have been the big stories impacting the profession, and certainly the big ones we've seen on Accounting Web. I think this kind of looking at these stories sets up to where we might be going into the next 3 months in the summer, and perhaps into the next few years, rest of the year as well. So there's about 4 or 5 which jumped out to me over the past 3 months, which I thought was probably worth talking about. The first trend is the strain which seems to be happening for owner-managed businesses. Looking at the most read articles on Accounting Web over the past 3 months, we've seen owner-managed businesses, directors being pummeled with, I say pummeled, they've been having additional pressures such as the additional information requirements for directors on tax returns. There's also been the additional strain for closed companies as well. All of these kind of add up to having some pressure there for owner-managed businesses, and some in just more intense scrutiny for those. So I guess that's one key theme that's jumped out.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's like a deliberate attempt from the government, but I think if you were an owner-managed business, you would feel like the government had it in for you. You know, that is my like everything they brought down, and it's so interesting. I think it was a QuickBooks event a few months back. I ran into Liz Barkley, who was the small business commissioner, and you know, we both sort of stood there solemnly shaking our heads about how no one in the government seems to understand that like 97% of the businesses in this country are like 1 or 2 person businesses, you know, and actually, I think the government's perception of a small business is that it's 10 or 20 employees, you know, and sort of has a little office, and that just isn't the case anymore. Not right-headed thinking.
It was a criticism which I guess was part of the downfall of Keir Starmer, is the fact that the government's been unable to create a narrative. They've been unable to tell a story. And as Rebecca Bennyworth said at Fab this year, talking about the budget, she said it just felt like the government was just reaching down the back of the sofa trying to find money from anywhere, which is fine if that's what they want to do. But there was no central narrative around what they're doing, and when they're kind of where their focus is spread to different pockets, as you said, Tom, and it kind of creates its own narrative of the government being against small businesses. When you look at things like the aggressive new closed company tax regimes, or the scrutiny around additional information requirements for company directors, you kind of piece these together, and suddenly you join the dots and create your own narrative about what's happening in terms of the government message. So perhaps, maybe that might change come the next budget. Who knows if they can kind of create some sort of narrative around what's happening. But to your point, Tom, there is that general idea about small businesses feeling the scrutiny at the moment. Speaking of which, another big theme that which we saw, and I think we spoke about at length on this podcast, I won't go into too much in depth on that, was around the small company P&L filing reforms, which has generated massive debate. And it's not just been with this government; it happened the previous governments when it started. It eventually came to a head, and we spoke about this a couple of podcast episodes ago. But yet again, this is another kind of layer of bureaucracy on top of everything else. And whilst this feels a little bit more watered down after being put on ice at the start of the year, it's kind of left many practitioners, I guess, with a sense of just fatigue around the whole thing. And whilst it's been watered down, I think that they're all feeling quite drained by the whole experience, if I'm honest. Added to that additional financial bureaucracy, there's been complexity growing around financial reporting standards with additional we've covered additional kind of financial reporting news on revenue recognition, lease accounting, FRS 102 changes. All of these have created all sorts of bureaucracy, and I'm sure I've read a comment on Accounting Web recently where someone said, I'm sure a muggle would look at this and not have the foggiest idea what on earth is happening. which kind of gets a sense of where people are when it comes to financial reporting. And then the other big theme that happened over the past 3 months was the ribbon cutting on MTD. That was officially cut at the start of April of this year. The big news, obviously, we'll get to that in a moment, is kind of the actual updates, but this is more ribbon cutting, and I think many practitioners kind of use this as an excuse to kind of understand the final rhythms and of the quarterly updates. There's still a campaign for extensions when it comes to the quarterly updates, but it doesn't look like there's going to be any. The government's going to comply with that at all.
It's been quite interesting looking on the forums and my WhatsApp groups and things like that of just people trying to make these submissions, and it seems a very mixed bag. There have been quite a few successful ones, but I think HMRC's decision to run a whole barrel of updates over the last weekend seems to have made customers of vendors of all colours are extremely angry. I don't think it had been properly communicated either by HMRC or the vendors, and so they ended up with loads of people trying to make submissions and it getting bounced, and lots of people, the classic wasp in a jar, angry buzzing response. Needless to say, I mean, all those groups are muted anyway. I just sort of dip in and out, but yeah, if you want to go and take the temperature, I'd say it's yes, definitely a mixed bag at the moment.
It's a wonderful exclusive that you've got those groups muted, Tom. That sends shockwaves through the profession.
That's just too many notifications. Like the various friends groups and things like that. It's kind of wild. Like, as a child of the 80s, if you'd have told me I'd had to deal with all this, it's too much. My brain just isn't wired that way.
Chuck it in the archive. Well, it's obviously been a very busy period then there, Richard. But what does this mean for the summer? It's going to be a summer of change. We're obviously going to get a new PM. We will, of course, well, it's likely we're going to have a new chancellor. What does it look like for the next few months?
So yeah, you could take all these themes which we just spoke about, and you could see them continuing on into the next 3 months. So in terms of those ones we just spoke about, MTD, obviously the ribbon was just cut when it comes to that. Now we're gearing up for the first update. This is going to be kind of the defining story of the next 3 months, I think, as firms rush towards that first update, and then afterwards have to dust themselves off and then gear up for the next one 3 months later. Yeah, I guess, Tom, this is it feels like a long time coming, this particular news story, but in a sense, because there's been so much of a lead up to it, almost in a sense feels quite anticlimactic in it, because it just feels like it's going to move into business as usual. Remind me, as we get up to date, I'm sure it's not going to feel that way at all. But they are making steady progress in terms of people signed up for the program. I think the number which I heard last week was around 400,000.
I think they can be happy with that. Not submitting. I guess people are always going to be like, you've got your early adopters, the keen beans, who are willing to sort of sign up and submit and test and everything like that. And then now we're in that sort of middle phase where people are sort of grudgingly doing their research, picking software and submitting and stuff. And, that I think it'd be really interesting to get that final number who've hit the deadline, because then we'll see what we're dealing with, and what proportion is represented by an agent, what's not, and I think it'll probably be quite useful for HMRC, to be perfectly honest with you, to sort of properly be able to zone in and target campaigns. And I hope they're given the resources needed to do that.
So that's MTD. The next big theme, which we're going to see that's going to continue on to the next 3 months, is that summer of tax uncertainty. If you remember last year when we had, goodness knows, all sorts of political kite flying exercises, every week there's felt like a new tax being tested out into the market, all sorts of Westminster whispers. With a new PM and presumably a new chancellor, we at the time of recording we still don't know who that is, but I'm sure we'll probably find out soon after Andy Burnham becomes PM, officially on Monday, after Monday next week. We'll find out who the PM is, and then at that point, I'm sure we'll get plenty of all sorts of tax rumors and everything, which is sends a similar kinds of shockwaves through the market as it did last year. If you remember, people were making business decisions based on rumors which were being spread in the broadsheets, and I'm sure we're going to get something similar to that as well. I think already we're kind of and we've not even had a chancellor named yet, and there's rumors of CGT and income tax equalization, business rate devolution, inheritance tax changes, property tax reforms. All of these have happened, some of it based on what people aiming to be chancellor have said, based on Burnham's previous speeches. People going through the archives, because at the moment there's that kind of vacuum, and people naturally want to fill that with information because they want certainty about decisions, and the only decisions that they can make are based on speeches from like 3 years ago, or something which a chancellor or someone who's aiming to be chancellor have said in passing as they've tried to stake their case to get one of the highest offices in the land. So we're going to get more of that going forward as we gear up to the budget, which still would probably be around 3 months after the point, 3 months or so, 3 or 4 months after the point where a new chancellor is in office. So plenty of time over the summer for rumours to swirl and go absolute wild. Speaking of the impact of some of the decisions before, I think we'll probably be seeing the most impact around the finance functions, actually, because Matt, you've heard whispers and spoken to FDs and CFOs. They're still feeling the effect of the rise in employer national insurance. They're still feeling the impact of the rise of national minimum wage. And so I'm sure they're going to be keeping close eye on some of these rumours, just to see if there's going to be a bit of a reprieve in the next few months, because it feels that kind of those forecasting cycles are getting shorter and shorter because of the uncertainty.
Yeah, it's hit a lot of them pretty hard, like you said. It's really had to reshape how they do a lot of their day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year. I think the idea that a 12-month forecast would last was beginning to wane anyway. Felt like it was on the side of, well, this isn't going to serve us for a full year anymore. But now that you've got what can only be described as an incredibly volatile economy, and you have got those rises with national minimum wage and the national employer national insurance, a 12-month just can't be relied on. To be fair, a lot of them have said, 3-5 years plans have just gone out the window, and it's moved primarily to month, which is really short in the grand scheme of things.
I mean, if you are, I don't know, a shipping company, or you rely on sort of moving goods around the world, or you sort of rely on imports, or whatever it is, and you've got the Mad King across the pond making decisions about blocking various parts of the waterways up, or adding tariffs and then rescinding them the next day. Like, you can't do a 3 to 6 month forecast. You've got to live day to day. It's very much the era of YOLO business, isn't it?
It is, and at a time as well when finance leaders are having to do a lot more. They are wearing the HR hat, the IT hat, the tech hat. They've got to be so flexible. And I think a lot of them are quite used to quite a rigid structure. They know what their days look like, what their months look like, what the year looks like. But really now they're having to navigate so much so often, and it must be exhausting.
So, and the final big theme, which I think we're going to see play out over the next 3 months a little bit more. So we're just coming out of event season, and one of the big headlines throughout all conferences, all events, has been around AI. and there's been an awful lot of hype around it. Kind of just go back to our conversation earlier in the podcast. I think I kind of get a sense that practitioners are feeling quite weary about the vendor noise and just the sense that kind of they have to get on board with AI, but they don't quite know what to do. And so perhaps I think over the next few months, over the summer months, it might be a time for some firms to use those quieter months to kind of play around with the tools a little bit, to kind of see use cases and to see kind of practical use cases for it, rather than just having a tool and trying to find a problem to solve. So I think maybe some may be using the summer kind of productively that way and seeing what they can actually do with AI.
Is it fair to say that this is the biggest period of change, be it changes that are happening right now or stuff we know is coming in 27, 28 that they've got to get ready for, that the profession has gone through in what feels like a very long time? Question for both of you, you've both been on the accounting beat for a while now.
I think there's always been change. We can take it back to sort of self-assessment, and then run it through RTI, obviously making tax digital, and now up ahead the looming prospect of e-invoicing and things like that. I think there's always been change from a technological point of view, from a compliance point of view. I think the fundamental thing that has shifted is the overall sort of global economic outlook. I mean, the term unstable is relative, right? I mean, if you're living in Tsarist Russia, in the sort of 1800s or whatever, then that's unstable, right? But if you've got, I don't know, I think someone like me has had the privilege of growing up in a fairly dull, stable economic environment where interest rates haven't moved that much, and there has been this sort of in developed economies, there has been that sort of sustained slowish growth. Now the tables have been flipped, and it is terribly volatile, and I think people are struggling to catch up with that.
Yeah, I would agree. Pick a point over the past 10 years, and you look at an article which I've written, and you'll probably pick out the phrase treadmill change, or kind of a constant treadmill of legislative change. I think, and you can look on any answers, and you can see people kind of complaining about all the change, and people saying, right, well, good job, I'm going to be retired next year. Good job, I'm going to be retired next year because of the amount of change. And you kind of get you kind of sympathize with it, because it's as part of if you're working in accountancy and tax, there's going to be an element of change constantly. Tax is one of those levers which any kind of government that comes in, they will be pulling on that lever because it's kind of the easiest route in order to increase the cash that a government has in order to do what they want to do. And so unfortunately, accountants tend to be at the brunt of all of these changes, because it's the first trick a government can play in order to raise revenues. On top of all of that, as Tom said, there's so much kind of global change. And then on top of that, we've got the technology disruption has just kind of turned up to 11 over the past few years. So there's a lot of change happening. It just feels like so much more because you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, fair point. I think anyone listening who is expecting a slightly quieter summer, think again. Thanks as ever for the insight on that one, Richard. For all in the next 3 months, it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out, of course. I want to see us out with a look at an element of the finance leader role that some are getting to grips with pretty well, some are having to step outside their comfort zone for. I spoke to Finley founder and Spare Room CFO Richard Davies recently, and while we went down many avenues, as is the case whenever you speak to a CFO these days because there's so much going on, picking your battles came to the fore. Gone are the days, or at least they should be behind us, where a finance leader can afford to be a yes man or a yes woman. They want to bring more value to the role and are expected to do so too. And this is one of the ways they can do that. Not every idea that comes from the founder or the CEO is going to be great. everyone has a stinker from time to time. I'm sure everyone on this call has had a terrible idea at some point in their life. If you as a CFO are willing to sit back and let that happen, you're a million miles away from the top of your game. Now, Davis spoke to me about finance needing to be the scaffold around the business as opposed to the ceiling, saying, we need to put up enough structure that the company can grow and breathe within it. If it grows in a certain way, you build the extension, so long as you've put the right foundations in place, which is a lovely metaphor. But there is, of course, a right way to do it. Otherwise, the relationships could start to suffer, and it comes back to that shift that comes up a lot in the conversations I have, that finance leaders at the moment are more and more wanting to avoid saying no and instead nudge the conversation in a direction that perhaps changes perspective, so they're seen as less of a hurdle. They want to ask, why are you doing that? Why would you do that? What's the reason? What's the plan? So instead of pushing back to the point that it's just saying no all the time, gets the founder thinking a little differently, and they can start to kind of flesh out their plans there and then. And it's another string to the bow of the finance leader, I think, Richard. And in a world where the CFO ought to be seen more as a partner to the CEO, this is the perfect segue.
Yes. Did I do that right? Yes, I think absolutely. I think the is we talk about the CFO as kind of the co-pilot. You hear that phrase thrown around quite a lot.
Yeah.
The co-pilot for the CEO, and in that relationship, there's no point having another person who's just going to agree with everything you say. Because what's the point of them? You rely on them for their judgment, rely on them for their insight, being so close to the numbers, rely on them for their strategic knowledge, and so it's that depth of knowledge that you go to for a CFO, and I think that's the skill and that they bring, and there's no point in just being a yes man, but I think it's kind of. It's that added layer. We spoke about it on the last podcast about soft skills.
Yeah.
And I think it's that next layer beyond that, isn't it? Having that that intelligence to navigate a political situation, and be able to react to the moment. And I think that's something which you kind of foster as you go along. You kind of grow that skill.
It is. I think, anyone who's looking to enter finance who is not confident in having the ability to have those conversations needn't be put off by that, because it is just one of those things that comes with time. No one is great at having a difficult conversation from the get-go. But in the context of all of that, there is a fine balance to be struck. If too little pushback, one of those rogue crazy calls or crazy ideas could go too far, too much pushback, and the CFO risk becoming a bit irritating and a hurdle to growth or innovation. Davies spoke of there being a risk that if you don't allow the CEO to breathe and come up with ideas, if you're in the room constantly being that person saying no. And it brings me back to a point I made at the start, that for a lot of finance leaders, having the confidence to provide that challenge in the first place may well take some doing. But I think it's a fair reflection of what's expected of a finance leader in 2026, Tom, that they do have to step out of their comfort zones a little more. It used to be quite siloed and introverted role, where now there does need to be an element of extrovert about it, and getting used to doing things they perhaps wouldn't have expected to do when they first got the gig.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I going back to your earlier point about, everyone making poor decisions or having a stinker. I definitely think Richard's decision to get into that truck cab was not a great one. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. Introverted, extroverted. Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one. I think the role has changed, and technology has changed the role so much, in that, in the past you'd have you'd have a sort of team, or I mean, depending on the size of the organization, there'd be a lot more sort of manual work, a lot more manual checking to be done, and then a lot more sort of retrospective looking back on the figures. Whereas now, there's a lot more automation involved. There is a lot more opportunity perhaps to present some forward facing things. But yeah, I mean, I think particularly at sort of CFO FD level. They've always had a voice in the boardroom, and have always been able to use it. But perhaps in the past that was perceived in a sort of negative way, that they were, the sort of sensible Sally in the room, just trying to hold back the buccaneering CEO. Whereas actually now, using evidence from the finances, that they're able to sort of tell a story a bit more and look a bit more into the future, as it were. So yeah, I think there's definitely elements of the role that's changed, but I think it would be nice to have a few different personality types in accounting.
Agreed. And you used the word opportunity there. I think that is exactly what this is. A lot of finance leaders, I'm sure, feel a little overwhelmed, having quite a lot on their plate. But within it all, there is just more opportunities for them to bring a bit of value to the company. I'm sure, all things considered, that's just a good thing. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. Join us next time to see what seafront shenanigans Richard has gotten up to and for a look at all the big goings on. But until then, take care.